Hey there. Alex and I hope you're enjoying your summer, and we hope you're about to enjoy this next episode. But before we get started, we have a quick disclaimer. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast by Dr. Ryan Christ are of his own and do not necessarily reflect the official views or policies of the Yale School of Medicine or any other academic institution. And with that, we'll get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Between Two Studs. I'm Alex Stud.
And I'm Ron Stud.
And Ron, for episode 49, tonight we got Dr. Ryan Christ here. Ryan, how we doing?
Doing well. Excited to be here. First podcast of ever to be on, so a little nervous, but excited to do this with you guys.
Congratulations.
Ryan, we are thrilled that your first podcast ever is with Between Two Studs.
Between Two Studs.
So before we get going, Ryan, we have a tradition around here. We pay homage to you, our guest for the night, but also our sponsor, the official spirit of Between Two Studs, Malort. So we're having a shot of this in honor of you and our sponsor. Cheers.
Cheers.
Ryan, did you have a chance to try Malort at our wedding? My wedding?
Yeah. It was an experience that I will never forget.
Good. That's a good answer. All right, Ryan. Are you in the zone? You ready?
Hit me.
All right. You have entered what Ron and I like to call the Ember Round. All right. So buckle up. First question of the Ember Round. This is just getting to know you a little bit. We always like to ask our guests, what's the story? What's the connection? How do you know the Studs?
Well, I know the Studs because Alex, you and I were in the same year since, middle school? 6th grade? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's been a number of years. And then, we got to know each other a lot more through marching band. We did that. And then Ron, I guess, just through extension by Alex.
Yeah.
And it's funny, actually, the first time you and Ron met was in Oxford. You remember when we came over the UK trip?
Yeah.
That was fun.
Yeah.
You guys got to check out our grad school dive house. The paint was peeling off the walls. It's great.
That was that was such a wonderful experience. I like to tell people, I think you managed to compress within a day, a full Oxford experience, because you took us to the library. You gave us a tour of Modeling College. You took us to your college's breakfast, and we had a traditional English breakfast. Oh. We saw graduation. You even took us into the exam area, that normally you'd only go in for the exams, right?
Yeah. And he took us to the bar that Bill Clinton smoked pot but didn't inhale.
That's right.
And we went to the admissions building, and we studied historic documents. We did technically go to that one little library part and look at some original Tolkien manuscripts.
Well, and we saw one of the original Magna Carta copies.
Right. And we did the old library, too. So I think, you could kind of say we practically got an Oxford education all in one day.
That's right. I think so.
Well, I like touring folks around, It's hospitality ones, Middletown's finest.
So, Ryan, tell us a little bit about yourself. What are some of your areas of interest?
Well, areas of interest. So, I'm a nerd. I like my day job is a mix of statistics and math and programming. I like politics junkie. So when I'm not consuming bits and bytes, I'm consuming lots of political news. My wife Emily and I are really big into politics reading. So, and we try to do our little activism here and there, but we do that. And then I guess, outside of that for hobbies, it's chilling on the couch, hiking when I'm feeling ambitious. And I think that rounds it out. Pretty straight and narrow nerd over here.
Oh, for sure.
What's wrong with that?
And don't forget occasionally having a nice margarita at the St. Louis Zoo.
Oh yeah, no, that's where we start. That's where it gets crazy. That's right.
I have to say, so Ron, when I first visited Ryan, who's in St. Louis, he took me to the zoo, and I am not a zoo guy. I'm like, really? We're going to look at animals? And then he was like, oh, yeah, you can get booze there. I'm like, all right, sign me up. And I remember thinking, why don't all zoos serve alcohol?
Well, it's really has a lot to do with this that I'm drinking here, just some Busch Light. Now, I know everyone's like, you're drinking Busch Light. What the hell are you doing? But Budweiser, originally based here in St. Louis, so I had to represent. Right. And this can is actually direct off the factory line. I got this during a tour at the Budweiser factory. This is a limited edition, like farmer can. Honors the farmers. It's got like a green background and things. John Deere. Anyway, so I felt like you guys were going to do Malort. I didn't know that, but I kind of assumed there would be some homage to the local, and so I thought I would kind of match in suit with a bit of Bud. So,
I love that. And for those who are listening who've never been to St. Louis and done the tour, it is really, really cool. Like, even if you're not a Budweiser guy, like, it's a massive campus they walk you through, like a bunch of different buildings, and they got the freaking Clydesdales. These things are monster beasts.
It's incredible. They're the best part. They're incredible,
Yeah.
Anheuser-Busch knows how to do a good tour, though. I learned one company that doesn't, which is Coors. If you're in, Colorado, don't do the Coors one. I learned that the hard way. But Anheuser-Busch, they do a pretty good tour. I liked it. I did the one tour in Busch Gardens in Virginia. Great time. So
cool.
Love it. So, Ryan, you explain what you're drinking. Ron, what are you drinking right now?
So, in honor of our guest tonight, I'm having Eagle Rare, which you remember we got that on Alex's bachelor party weekend, which I've even got the glass ready for that. So, I have to say, I love Eagle Rare. It's such a really good bourbon. And cheers.
Cheers.
What about you, Alex? What are you drinking?
So I am drinking a St. Louis specialty in honor of Ryan. It's a malt whiskey called Cardinal Sin.
Ooh, nice. Cool.
Oh, you've had that before, right?
I have had this on the show. My wife, her maid of honor, who's Ryan's met, her name's Sam. Hannah went out and visited her, and Hannah came back with this bottle for me. It's different. It's a malt whiskey. It's probably not my traditional taste, but knowing that we were chatting with a St. Louis boy tonight, I had to represent.
There you go.
I like it.
Love it.
So we got through the drinking question, which is always an important question. The other question that is a fan favorite, Ryan, we always ask our guests, and I'm very curious what your answer is going to be. We always ask our guests to pick a piece of art that somehow either speaks to them or represents them in one way, shape, or form. And as you can imagine, you're episode 49. We've had probably 40 guests or so, and we've gotten some very distinct answers. I mean, people are talking about, someone gave us the Boston Marathon as an answer. Someone gave us, we've gotten movies, we've gotten TV shows, we've gotten albums, we've gotten songs. What is it for Mr. Christ, Dr. Christ?
Ooh. I mean, I got to say, there are a lot of things that come to mind. Artworks, songs, books. I'm trying to think. I don't know if I could say like one that. I don't really feel like the one that represents me. That's tough.
Or speaks to you. Speaks to you.
Yeah, could just be like resonates with you.
One I'm reading right now that I really love, actually. If anyone out there, I highly recommend the author Ted Chiang. He has a couple of collections of tours, of stories. I think I recommended this one to Ron, but I read it not that long ago, actually. And I'm actually going back through the stories right now. Exhalation by Ted Chiang, but they are. It is an incredible collection of short stories that are science fiction, but they touch on very humanistic themes, questions about culture, identity. What would be the it plays with implications of things like time travel and language and sci-fi tech, but it always actually asks very human things, human questions, and it tends to, it has a dark. Sci-fi often has a dark side of humanity that it's usually trying to expose, right, in one form or another, social critique. And Ted Chiang does that, but he also tends to leave you with a bit of a hopeful feeling. Like, you've seen every story has a warm side as well, and as well as a dark side, and it's really beautiful. So it's something where I hope that it brings in this nice interest of the humanistic and the science, and so maybe that it's kind of a lot of interest that maybe we all share, but it's there for me too.
But a silver lining in there is what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I know I had read after, last time we met, you had recommended one of his books that had the Tower of Babel story in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I really liked how he does a lot of world building. Like, even for like short stories with science fiction, I think that's a difficult thing to do because it's like you have to set some kind of tone about and make it real. That's what helps kind of to build the characters and also get you invested and interested. And it's such a tough thing to do, but you could kind of already see where in that story, I remember where there was a lot of history about the building of this tower, where some people had only been to certain parts of it, and just a lot of the dialogue that was going on within it. And I was really impressed with it. So that was a great pick, by the way. So thank you for that. But yeah, he's an excellent author.
Yeah, it's one thing about him that I find really refreshing, especially sci-fi, especially like Tolkien. Like, they do world building, but they're kind of loose with it. In the sense that, like, it's not like every word is very deliberately chosen. They just kind of go on, and there's some detail here and there. Ted Chiang, you read him, and he's very concise, and in each word, is there, very deliberately chosen for that purpose. And you really get that. And you don't always get that with an author. So it's really nice. Yeah.
Let me ask you something, Ryan. You kept comparing him to Tolkien. And to me, I don't think of Tolkien as sci-fi. I think of Tolkien as more fantasy. I guess where do you see the delineation of the two? Not to get too philosophical here, but
that's an interesting question. I am not a deep enough reader in any of these things. I mean, just with world building perspective. I see. But it's funny actually. If you listen, Ted Chiang was on the Ezra Klein show maybe a year ago, long time ago, and he was asked that question. And I'll just redirect listeners to go listen to that interview between Ezra Klein and Ted Chiang to listen to Ted Chiang's answer to the difference between fantasy and sci-fi. It's quite interesting, actually. But I won't plagiarize it here.
All right. Well, homework for everyone. Go listen to that episode.
Well, with Tolkien, too, I mean, and sorry for kind of going down a little bit of a rabbit hole, but it's interesting how people have built entire careers just analyzing his work. Which is kind of interesting because I saw a really good, it was like a doctoral thesis where somebody put together specifically for Frank Herbert's Dune, basically trying to do the similar type of analysis because it's kind of one of those weird things where Dune is a very, very epic long story and it just doesn't get nearly as much attention as like Tolkien works do. And yes, you do have world building, but it's a different type of world building in its own right. Well, like you've got in both worlds, right, you have this extensive history. And it was a really kind of interesting analysis, but I think it's kind of a weird thing where the authors, what they can do with it, it can be really challenging to really kind of say, like, okay, do we need to, am I building this world and all of this level? Like, I mean, Tolkien actually had whole language that was developed for it. Dune in some ways kind of had even similar things where there's a lot of words and loan words and things that were integrated as part of kind of a cultural tapestry. It's a really kind of complicated thing, but also another thing to check out if you are interested in sci-fi is there's a good series on YouTube where somebody does try to do this whole cultural analysis on Dune that's worth checking out. So.
Well, and of course with all of these authors, there's these inner workings, Tolkien with Christianity, right?
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot going on. Let me ask you both this before we move on, because I'm just curious to have you both here and ask you this. Do you think George R.R. Martin, obviously most famous for the Game of Thrones series, do you think when we are long gone, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, do you think he will be considered in the same category, or is he more flavor of the week just right now because of the show?
I've never read the actual books. I've only watched the show. So it's hard to judge because the show, you can't judge the author by the show. You know what I mean? I don't know. Have you read them, Ron?
I've read the first 3. I need to finish the others, but I would say, that's a tough question, because I think part of the problem is that there is a bias because of the show. Like, the show was such a success, but the last season really kind of went off a bit.
Oh, it's awful. That end?
Right.
What were they doing? It was clearly not his end, right? It was like...
Yeah.
Oh.
And clearly rushed. Rushed. I mean,
Right.
There were several, and not any spoilers here, but clearly there were some loose ends that never got addressed. And it was
even
like,
just character decisions, like characters were completely out of character in some ways. Like, one of the characters, like Tyrion, very brilliant guy, has always figured his way out of different problems, and then he just, like, the last 2 seasons, he's just kind of like an idiot, and you're like, there's no explanation for it. It's just, that's how he is. And like Daenerys, like, all throughout the series, she's pretty much about trying to take care of people, doing what's right by people. And then it's just like, not quite, I'm not really down with that anymore. And there's just a lot of pivots.
I will say this, and now we've blown it open, so sorry, everybody.
Sure.
The spoilers are there. But in that particular instance, I think there wasn't really... I'm all for characters who turn evil. I'm all about it. I love it. But there really wasn't a story arc that really explained her turn, her change.
Right.
It just sort of happened, and all of a sudden she's letting her dragons light people on fire. It didn't seem like a gradual transition that you would see in a lot of great other works of fiction, right?
Yeah. No,
it's not normally a light switch.
And for her, I mean, she had this backstory of she's a Targaryen, and like other people in her orbit started doing suspicious things and kind of betraying her trust. So, her slip into darkness is, paved by these small but, accumulating betrayals. So they do give her some of that, but it's kind of weak. I agree. And I don't know who's really weak is Cersei, and she's bad bone to bone, beginning to end. But her end is, oh my god, I'm in a tower, there are dragons, I have no plan, I die into some rubble. It's like, this is Cersei. She's a god. Yes, a god. What? Why that? What? Like, what?
Sure.
It's almost like they had a very specific budget for the final season.
Yeah.
And the original writers were like, all right, we're going to need 12 episodes to do this. And they were like, funny, you got 7. They were like, oh, shit.
And even better, I feel like they also said to the writing staff, you know what, all 12 of you, now it's 6. Good luck.
Well, I almost felt, and not to demonize the show, because my question was about the books, but
which we'll get back to, but we're making progress.
I do think that there must have been some flaws in the story arc of the final season where they must have been like, all right, you and your group go out, write episode 1. You and your group write episode 2, you write episode 3, and there was almost like no collaboration because there was some serious issues that I just felt were never addressed. And it's almost like, well, if they were never going to be addressed, why did you write them in? Why did you write them in the first place? Right? Like, why were they even in? You could have just written them out. They should have never been in.
And see, I think that speaks to what may be the problem with Martin's legacy, which is, can he end the story, or has he written himself into a hole that he's just not going to be able to get out of? And I think maybe that might be one of the reasons why he's taking longer and longer to basically write the books, is because he realizes that how do you make everything kind of end where you want it to? It's a big challenge. I mean, shoot, even like Tolkien, right? Yes, he had books that weren't completely finished, but he did so much with... He finished Lord of the Rings. He finished the similarity... I can't even pronounce it. But he did a lot of these additional stories that even his family and other scholars were able to kind of eventually put together. But it was still kind of mentioned, like, yeah, this is ancillary things, right? These are some stories that were kind of still being worked on. And I think that's maybe one of the challenges of adapting a TV show like that, is so far into the series, when you're the showrunners and you've got HBO and there's pressure, especially because you have all of these actors that want to be getting it through. They want to finish it up. They don't want to wait forever, and they want to do their other side projects. I think that's one of the problems that Martin ran into. And it'll be interesting to see if he can write his way out of it.
Do you think, Ron or Ryan, either one of you, I mean, it doesn't even matter if you've read the books or not. Do you think someone like him, who is now in his 70s, as far as I know, he's in his early 70s, he's a very overweight man. We don't know how long he's going to have. Do you think there's almost... I didn't mean to sound morbid. I know, Ryan, your eyes got lit up there. But do you think there's almost his legacy will stay intact if it's never finished, as opposed to releasing a final book or two that suck? Do you know what I mean? Do you think he's almost, there's a subconsciously even, if there's well, maybe my legacy, if I never release a really terrible ending, there's always going to be the mystique. It's almost like that player that retired, right? An athlete that retired while they were still at their peak, and there's always that, well, what if, right? As opposed to, oh, they played until they sucked. You know what I'm saying?
Definitely stick with the what if. Definitely stick with the what if. That's my vote. If you want my legacy, don't go out with a lead balloon.
So then, if you're him, you would just delay it, keep kicking the can.
Exactly.
And say, well, it'll come, and then you just die. And then there'll always be it could have been his magnum opus, but in reality, we all know it was going to suck, and he was just delaying the inevitable. And I'm just saying it's a possibility.
Depends how confident he is in his new stock,
It could be that. I guess the way I would look at it, too, is, as an artist, right, there is a certain level of, if it is his magnum opus, you want to make sure that you're really in that space, that it's a work of love, right? And the dude is certainly a prolific writer. He puts out, Elden Ring he did a lot with that even. So yeah, there's definitely questions well, why don't you just finish it? But I do kind of wonder. I think there may be some level of, it's just a lot of work, and it's a bit of a headache that he's just kind of putting off. But I think what's interesting too is kind of tying it back to another author like Stephen King, right? For those that don't know, Stephen King's universe is pretty massive as well. I want to say he's got 2 or 3 people on his staff that basically just work with continuity between all of the different books, because there's a lot of different callbacks, and it's kind of it's a difficult challenge. Once you're kind of that far into something like Game of Thrones or even Stephen King books, you have to make sure that it flows together, because people will pick out those details and say, you didn't try here, or you slipped here. And I'm sure there is some level of that may also be a factor.
All right, Ron. So I got one. This is a yes or no question, and then we got to move on.
Okay. All right.
So this podcast, this episode with Ryan Christ, will outlive us all, right? It'll be in the ether when we're all in the grave, right?
Yes.
So someone stumbles upon this in 100 years. They don't know who we are. Is George R.R. Martin in the same category as someone like Tolkien? AKA, are there people with a PhD dissertation interpreting George R.R. Martin? Yes or no?
Yes.
All right. For those listening in 100 years, there you go. You can say you were wrong. You were wrong, or you were right. All right. So last question of the Ember Round, Ryan. And this is a very loaded question, but I think it's a very good question. COVID has impacted all of us, and it has changed us in a way that is forever, right? And one of the questions, Ron and I are a pretty upbeat, positive show. We like to think of, hey, in this horrible situation, what's something that was positive that came out of this that permanently altered or changed your life? Ron and I always give the example. We started this podcast as a direct result of being stuck in our homes. Ryan, what would you say to that question?
That's a good question. COVID was interesting. I guess it was hard in a way because Emily, my wife, and I were away from each other for a year because of COVID. She's British and across the pond. So it was definitely a hard time. I guess one flip side of that was that I was basically spending a lot of time holed up in my house. So at that time I was renting in a group of 4 units. And the guy who lived across from me, Jay, is now one of my best men at this wedding we're about to have. And, we got to hang out a lot and basically do dinners and chill. And, so that was for a whole year.
He was in your pod.
Yeah, my pod.
Everyone had their pods.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, we grew really close. We also came closer, with our two other neighbors downstairs. And now, I was just at their backyard for our barbecue this past weekend for Pride Month. And, so anyway, there was all kinds of, I guess that's the silver lining, the pod building,
For sure. Well,
awesome.
Ryan, congratulations. Got out of the Emperor. Yeah. I know you were sweating that one. Yeah. Your dissertation at Oxford was a breeze compared to that.
That's right.
Yeah. All right. So the next thing we do is called the speed rounds. And we only started this couple episodes, but it's been a big hit. Ryan, don't overanalyze too much, because I know you can do that sometimes.
I can go
I
on.
love you for it.
I can wax. I can wax.
I know you can do this, but I want your immediate reaction. Ron and I are going to hold you to 5 words or less. By the way, 1 is okay. 1 word is acceptable. We're going to give you up to 5 words to respond to something we're going to tell you, and that involves you directly. Right? You're involved in it. And all I need to do is 5 words or less. Ron and I are going to rotate. We're going to go back and forth. And if we want, we'll ask for more detail.
Mm-hmm.
Are you ready?
Let's go.
I'll start, Ron, then you go the second word. We'll go back and forth. All right.
Okay. I'll adjudicate, because why not?
Yeah. All right, Ryan. Delaware's famous Grotto's Pizza.
Skip it.
Wow. That's harsh.
Don't you agree, though, in Delaware, people either love it or hate it? It's very polarized.
It is really sweet, the sauce. Really
I
sweet.
find it very greasy. Very greasy.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Too sweet.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
Skip it.
All right.
Next.
Middletown High School.
Great place.
I love it.
Middletown marching band. Or marching band in general, I should say.
The GOAT.
And that was such a wonderful time in our lives. It was something that, we were constantly between practice, band competitions, football games. Those are lives.
Yeah. No. Yeah, it's
crazy.
not, and it's just incredible, right? Because you think about it, you're getting a bunch of people to come together to build something. Make this music that's in the air, like between you guys. It's an ethereal thing that you're co-creating and co-experiencing. And you get that doing being part of any concert. But you're doing that in such a public way that's like plugged into the core of culture at like the halftime show of football games and in other contexts. And on top of that, it's a co-ed sport. So all the football players are out there playing with balls and sticks. You guys are hanging in there and becoming, more sensitive, better, men and women. Sorry, just saying.
Love it.
Just to put a little, sale point in there for the marching band.
Love it.
Well, one thing, too, that was also nice about Middletown is you remember a lot of the people that would go to the games would also bring their own musical instrument. Which,
Cowbell.
That's right. More cowbell, folks, right?
That's right.
So that was fun. I love that. All right. Next question. People who wear Harvard gear without any affiliation to the college.
Good on them.
You know what, Ryan? Good on you for saying that, because when I lived in Boston, that drove me crazy. And I have zero affiliation with Harvard at all. You're the closest affiliation I have. And I don't know. I went to a silly state school, but when I see someone anywhere in the country with Westchester University, I get excited. I'm like, hey, and I reach out to them. And if someone were to just say, oh, no, it's just a shirt I bought, I'd be like, screw you.
Oh.
So I always wanted to ask you that question.
I kind of think of that kind of like, I'm not sure if you've seen like people with like Lamborghini shirts and they don't own one. You're kind of like, oh, is that just like an aspirational thing? Or, I don't know. But if it makes them happy, good on them. Fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
Emo's Pizza, which for those who aren't aware, that's like very St. Louis style pizza.
Definitely skip it.
Oh, you don't like the Provel?
Provel is some manufactured fake cheese that was meant for the Cold War and should have stayed and died with the Cold War.
Oh my God! All right, for those who are tuning in from St. Louis, you can just stop the episode from here. You have my permission to turn it off.
I brought the bush. All right, I'm trying, but no, the problem is not made for human consumption.
All right, let's see. The Gateway Arch.
Definitely check it out.
Have you gone up it?
Yeah,
you done the whole thing.
I've been up it. I've been down it. They've actually redone the entire underground. It's not a national park. It's run by the National Park Service, and there's a history museum that's been rebuilt underneath. That's absolutely excellent. Very hands-on. You can see like how like a lot of the initial town like of St. Louis, the group of the city, was built, like the physical bits there and the tools they used, and they also a much more modern kind of take on Western expansion, which is refreshing and really interesting. And so it goes a lot further than most museums. Definitely worth the time. So.
Good to know. I haven't done it. And then finally, another St. Louis like legends. Hopefully, you're not going to bastardize this one. Toasted ravioli.
I mean, I don't really. If I'm not gonna bastardize, I don't know what much more to say. It's not worth it.
Oh my God!
It's not
so
worth
you just hate St. Louis outside of the beer, don't you?
Oh, I love
Just
St.
kidding.
Louis.
I'm just
Those
kidding.
are just not the reasons they come. Go to the Hill.
He just doesn't like.
That's American, Italian, and that stuff can be good or it can be bad. But the good stuff, the good American Italian bakeries that we go to over on the Hill, which is one of the still core Italian districts in America, have much better offerings than that. They've got real gelato, like we're talking the real McCoy. They've got you go into the bakery there, you can get they have all the biscuits and Italian treats you'd imagine, and the quality is so much better. The toasted ravioli is another tourist trap. Skip it. Yep.
Fair enough.
All right. Well, I have to throw in one last one then, because we've got two pizzas we don't like. You've got the whole range of the globe that you've been across. Tell us where you have had the best pizza ever.
The best pizza ever? Ever.
Yes.
Ever. Your best slice ever.
I mean, it's gotta be Italy. It's the water, man. It's incredible over there. Naples is really good. But, I mean, if you're going to say in St. Louis, I will say Pie Pizza, which I will also say Barack Obama noted that as his favorite pizza shop back in the day.
You took me.
Famous. Yep. Their Bucktown.
That was very good pizza.
That tomato sauce, you have to like it. It's deep dish, corn crust. It's different. But I don't know. They must put crack or something in that tomato sauce. But it is off the chain. It's really good.
I love it. Hey, Ryan, you completed the speed round. You already completed the Ember round. Great job. What we're going to do is we're going to go to break. When we come back, we got a lot of topics to get through. We want to talk about your time at Harvard, then your time at Oxford. You're doing stuff at Yale. You're in St. Louis. There's a lot going on in your life, and we're going to get to it when we come right back.
We hope you're enjoying this episode so far. Wanted to let you know that if you ever need to reach out to Alex or myself, feel free to email us at between@twostuds.com. Again, that's between@twostuds.com. We'll get right back to the program. Enjoy.
All right, welcome back to Between Two Studs. We're hanging out with Dr. Ryan Christ. And Ryan, we got to know you through the Ember round and through the speed round. Now, let's really dive deep, all right? Are you ready?
Let's go.
All right. So we already covered this earlier. We went to high school together, and then you went to this little no-name school no one's ever heard of. While you were at that school, known as Harvard, I think I'm pronouncing that right. While you were at that school, you spent a lot of time inspecting fruit fly brains, one by one. Now, what was that like, and what were you even trying to accomplish when you were doing that?
Yeah, I won't lie, it was pretty awful. The day-to-day of being a brain fly geneticist is pretty rough. I mean, for people outside the sciences, you might think, what the heck do fruit flies have to do with humans? But they're actually use a model, it's what's called a model organism, for studying human biology, because we, believe it or not, share a lot of very fundamental biology with even the fruit fly, which is very, very, very far away from us in the phylogenetic ancestry. And so because they also breed so quickly and reproduce so quickly, you can easily genetically modify them with very quick, get the crosses you need, get the right genetics you need very quickly in a lab and study them. And you also feel better, honestly, working with fruit flies than you do like working with mice. I mean, God, working with mice, I don't know. Even as a scientist, that feels a bit close to home. You know what I mean? So,
well, especially if you're going through hundreds of them.
Right, exactly. So, but yeah, so that's what it is. And what is it like? Don't drink coffee, because if you're trying to dissect a fruit fly brain under a microscope, forget about it. Like the shake of you're doing it with forceps, right? It's just like, no way. And once you get it, you'll fix it in candle wax, paraffin, and then you section it out and with a microtome into slices and look at it on a slide under a microscope. But yeah, I was studying Alzheimer's disease. It was looking at that was something I got into, and I realized I was quite bad at it actually. I like nearly destroyed one of the very expensive microscopes by putting oil on a slide that wasn't meant to have oil on it. Once I dropped a huge vial of flies. And if you might imagine, the key of a fly genetics lab is to very carefully control who mates with who, right? Mm-hmm. And I dropped this huge batch of flies and released it into the air while everyone's got their flies out and working with them. And everyone's trying to shuffle their flies into containers and like stash them away before there's some cross-contamination, because, they get it on. And after a few incidents like that, I was like, I think like science in the physical lab is not made. I'm not made for this. So I'm a bit clumsy. So I think that's why I got into computers. They're a little more forgiving.
Well, but I want to learn a little bit more. Like, so you were going through their brains, and I understand their life cycle is very quick, right? So the beauty is you can go through their life cycle very, a lot of generations. But what ultimately were you trying to figure out, or what did you determine? From this?
Wow, I can't say I determined much of anything. I was an undergraduate working for
your lab, the lab that you were a part of.
Exactly, the lab I was a part of was. There's two camps, historically. Now it's kind of merging and mixing, and it's more complicated. The two camps in the scientific community in the study of Alzheimer's disease. Those that look at the tau pathway. Tau, it's the protein that makes up the neurofibrillary tangles inside neurons that develop during are seen in Alzheimer's pathology. And there's the A-beta camp. Those who look at the plaques, the extracellular plaques that form in the brain with Alzheimer's, these two different types of inclusions. And so it was a tau lab and was studying ways that basically we gave flies Alzheimer's by putting a mutant version of human tau into their brains. And they developed brain pathology that looked very similar to Alzheimer's. And then the goal was rescue it. Is there some other way you can modify their genome to make the Alzheimer's not so bad? Because if you can do that, it might be a drug target. Does that make sense? That's the rough idea. And so, and actually it was really exciting. My project, I won't spend too much time on this, but it was looking at modifying pathways to do with trafficking in the Golgi apparatus, which is kind of the post office of the cell. It sends things different places. And we found that when we modified a tagging protein it's a barcode that kind of says go to the Golgi or go from the Golgi. It's a kind of a target for that post office, like a barcode for that post office. It's trafficking proteins around the cell. When we upregulated it in the fly, it actually rescued the Alzheimer's phenotype. Meaning, whoa, and that usually never happens. And this is during an undergraduate project. So anyway, so that's I was already probably planning to leave the lab because I'm just not very good at this science. But actually, that was quickly handed off to a postdoc, not even just a doctoral student, a postdoc to follow up because it was so interesting.
Wow, because there was
implications.
Yeah. Because there was some. I assume what would happen is if there's success within something like a fruit fly.
Yep.
then eventually you would say, okay, we should test this out with rats.
With humans.
And
yep, rat. Yeah,
you'd eventually get to maybe human trials.
Yeah, exactly. Because you see, what's special is if an engine's broken, there are many ways you could screw with it to make it more broken. But there are very few things you can do to actually fix it. That's what the key thing was. It fixed the brain, and you were like, "Whoa, what's going on?" And so, I think actually, sadly, I don't think anything much came out of that work. I didn't follow it too closely, but years later, it's not like there's been a breakthrough in Rab6 mediated tau pathology rescue in humans. So, but it's just a really hard problem. Alzheimer's is a nasty disease, and it's so the biology behind it is very very murky, even still.
So even outside of the biology, right, you're getting into some pretty complicated math, right, in order to really kind of do pathway analysis. Is that what led you into studying like applied mathematics?
Oh, it's interesting. So the pathway analysis stuff is something that, is a problem that I started trying to look at, and that's just trying to look at networks of gene interaction in how does the body work, right? How do these proteins interact to perform functions, and trying to figure out, can we figure out some Alzheimer's pathway? And lots of people have done real work on that. I was just an undergraduate doing a small little bit of project in there. I wouldn't say necessarily what got me into doing maths. More fundamentally, I guess for me actually I was always like kind of good at maths, but I didn't plan to like study it as my main topic. It's just I was going to do neuroscience actually, and then I took population genetics, which is kind of related to this genomics right stuff, but it's more population based, and it's kind of what I do now in more human genomics, and it's just great. It's amazing. It's a really cool field, and actually it was pioneered because it's basically all statistics and math, right? It was pioneered by some of the great figures, quote, of statistics. R.A. Fisher, Wright, so that's what kind of got me into it. I was like, oh yeah, I really need to get into this stuff. Okay, well, I guess I better go do a bunch more math. I've kind of already taken some other background math classes just for kicks on the side there. And then so I decided to like really delve into statistics and probability, because that's what really introduced it to me, like formally, like interest in probability, which is just such an amazing, branch. It's really fun.
Interesting.
Yeah, it changes how you see the world.
So
go ahead.
But you did ultimately study applied mathematics.
Yeah.
At Harvard, and all kidding aside, I do think there's a lot of mystique around that college that you went to, right? Can you talk about some of that culture? I mean, like one of the things that I noticed, I visited you when we were both students, and you lived in Lowell House. And there was a whole thing related to that. Can you talk about these different houses?
Yeah, I mean, they're the idea is that people, in some sense, build a community on a smaller scale than a large college, and that's what the houses are trying to do. It's based off of the idea of colleges at Oxford and Cambridge. It's basically a dorm. Each house is a dormitory that has attached to it its own kind of, within that dormitory, its own dining hall, its own kind of athletic facility, its own kind of community spaces, its own types of
its own library,
too,
right?
Its own cultural events, its own like tea on Wednesdays for Lowell House. So it's all a way to try to build local community. It's nice, and actually, what's nice about it, I think for me, one of the best things about it, because the students are cool, interesting, diverse, no matter where you're at. What it lets you do is the house actually provides. Also, it's funny actually. They get graduate students and even a couple more like junior level kind of professional people to actually live in the house. They live in the house for free. They get like benefits and free food, but they actually live in and among the students to kind of do a transfer of knowledge and some mentorship. So, you'll have like medical students or law students going to Harvard Medicine, Harvard Law, there to mentor you as an undergrad about those professions or business or other areas. We had a guy who was litigating the BP oil spill case living in that dorm, and you could talk to him at night about what that was about and what that's like.
Wow.
So that's the real, I think if I think back to the college system, that was the real benefit of that system, was giving you access and
the wealth of knowledge.
You're having dinner with these people, right? I mean, that's cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
What better way
I have to ask.
Yeah, what better way to really get those practical insights that I think so many times in education, you don't really get until you go out there and do it yourself, or if you just have mentors or other people that you talk to that are into the industry to kind of have that right there. And I think one of the nice parts about that too is you have a way of also kind of preserving part of the culture, so that you have, when I went here, this is what was going on, or this is what we were doing, and you kind of have that nice kind of handover where I think even like we've had a few guests on. Alex was in a service fraternity called the Friars, and you certainly hear about one of those things, but it's important to kind of have some of those older members that come back that are no longer going to the school, just to kind of keep things kind of moving along, pass the legacy around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, so it's cool. I mean,
well,
go ahead. I mean, the legacy of Lowell himself is actually quite abysmal. So it's interesting about they're actually thinking of changing the name. I'm not sure if they have decided that yet or not, but yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah, we don't need to go into there. We can. But yeah,
and there's a whole town called Lowell, Massachusetts. So that creates a whole other can of worms. Yeah, but the last question I have to ask about this, and I know, I'm sure you get questions about this. You think about secret societies. I know at Harvard they have these things called final clubs, and I've heard stories at Ivy League parties where cell phones and cameras are collected at the door. Were you aware of these parties? Did you attend any of these parties? I don't need to know any of the details, but I'm fascinated. I gotta know.
I hate to tell you guys, I don't have any juicy stories there. Basically, although Harvard I think does a good job when you're inducted as a freshman, there's a whole. Remember the first week? There's a whole thing about class, about trying to meld between classes. Remember, a quarter of people there are on full rides. I was one of them, not because of academic achievement. Because of financial need. You don't come from money. You get a free ride. And a quarter of people were there paying full price, a.k.a. they came from money. And about 50% of people were somewhere in between. And what you do realize, the finals clubs, they are something that costs like, what, 5, 10 grand, something stupid a semester to belong to. Right? So it naturally just resegregates people by class, wealth. And so that's what those are about, mostly at Harvard. There are a couple off-campus fraternities, but by and large, especially among the male finals clubs, there are some female ones which I think are a little more accessible. But basically, if you're going to be a part of the male finals clubs, you come from money, or you're really good friends and thought to be very cool by someone who comes from money. And so that's that's kind of what they're about. I mean, they do have very illustrious histories, some of them with their membership, all the presidents, all the, you name it, blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, I'm sure they're a good group to be connected with from career perspective, but I don't know. I think their reputation was also, a bit, as one was a bit predatory, right? As you would think of many fraternities, kind of classic fraternities. So it was also like not something I was even keen to really engage with. Now, in terms of like phones, I've never been to a party where those were confiscated. But
I've heard these stories and I'm like, well, that makes sense, right? If I'm going into a party as a 19-year-old with future senators and future congressmen and potentially future presidents, I wouldn't want photos either.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Right? Absolutely. No, I totally get that. I guess, the nerds will do what the nerds do.
So
I got it most nights to not party, unfortunately. But yeah, go ahead.
So question 2, like I know that I think in the past 20 years there's really been a lot of shifts going on culturally. What is your perspective on that with finals clubs? Does it seem like some of that is also changing because of, maybe the bad reputation of, hey, there's parties and things are going on that's more coming to light? Or do you think it's always kind of been more about really kind of just the fraternity side of it? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I honestly haven't been in touch with the full debate, but Harvard's been trying to shut down the finals clubs for a long time. And they can't really because they privately own the real estate they're on, and it's very complicated. I think especially post #MeToo, I mean, there's a big push against them. I don't know what the status of them on campus is now. No idea. I'm talking 10 years ago now, basically, almost.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, though. If they're privately owned and managed and they're not actually affiliated with the university, they have their own endowment,
They
I'm sure.
do.
And what can you as a university do?
Well, they are affiliated and they're not. It's awkward. I don't honestly know the particulars, but yeah, it's shady shit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so after your studies at Harvard, I know you ended up going to Oxford, which is where Ron and I met up with you several years back, and you were working on your Doctor of Philosophy there. They call it DPhil as opposed to a PhD there, right?
That's right. Just flip the letters around.
Yeah, the English have to do something a little different.
They always do.
Or maybe we have to do something a little different from them. I guess it's all perspective.
It's funny. It's
right?
not just only Oxford. Cambridge, they call it a PhD. But Oxford, since like the year 1000 something, called it a DPhil, and they haven't changed. So there it is.
God damn you, William the Conqueror, 1066.
I mean, right.
I'm just kidding. I have no idea if he was involved or not. But so I know you studied computational statistics and you were working on the Human Genome Project. I think a lot of people have heard of that project, but what the hell is it?
Oh well, to be clear, I used as most all human geneticists do data built from the Human Genome Project, but I myself wasn't working on the Human Genome Project. Sorry, just to clarify that point.
Okay.
But yeah, so well, do you want to know about the Human Genome Project or more my research, or which way do you want to go?
Both. But
okay.
Explain what it is first.
Sure. Well, the Human Genome Project was a project that completed a good. Wow, maybe it's 20-some years old now. I got to remember. It's been a long time, actually. But it was the first sequencing of kind of a collection of humans' genomes to create what's called a reference human genome. And to try to explain what that means is most humans, our DNA is the same at 99 whatever percent of sites, right? It's identical across all humans. Right? And what sets us apart genetically are these scattered sites of mutations that have happened along the human lineage. And the human genome...
These are just natural mutations that happen over the course of many generations.
Yeah, across the human ancestry, history of human ancestry. And so the Human Genome Project's goal, right, was to provide a scaffold, a complete sequencing of a human. And once you have that, and it wasn't actually complete, they only got 90%. Only now with the telomere to telomere project are they actually filling in the last 10%. But, with that scaffold, you're able to then you have a baseline on which to detect mutations. Like, okay, here's a person's genome, and now I want to go find these sites that are different among humans. It's much easier to do that once you kind of have a reference sequence to kind of build off of. Because the way sequencing works, you don't sequence a human genome from each chromosome end to end. We don't have that technology. Well, people are working on that. I don't know if PacBio has quite gotten there. But anyway, they do they sequence the genome in little segments. And so in order to figure out where in the hell the genome you are, you need a reference to match that segment. And then within that little segment, you can figure out there's been variation off the reference. But that's why you need a reference, because you sequence the genome in little segments.
So is the idea that you could actually understand, for lack of a better word, a baseline of what the human genome should be, and then understand when there are deviations off of that, or maybe even predict when there are mutations?
Yeah, just to find mutations, to find regions that differ among humans. That's all. That's the key thing, is you need to be able to find the differences in the first place. And just to be technical in the language there, is baseline. It's not like this is like the common human ancestor or something. This is just a dude, or I think it was I don't think it was just one person. I think it was a couple people or a few people that kind of got melded into one, if you will. But it's not like it's not like the human ancestor. It's like a person. You could think of it as in the Homin population.
Okay.
Now, since it was anyway, we can get into it. But now people are doing the Pan Genome Project, which is a very exciting thing. I think they're almost done with it now. Which is actually a collection of human reference genomes that better explore the diversity among humans. Anyway, we can get into why that's more detail than it's worth, but it's cool.
Well, I think what I really want to understand, Ryan, is for those listening, what is the value of this data? Is the idea that we'd be able to understand these deviations, these mutations, and that can help us with advancements of science and potentially of curing diseases?
Yeah,
what's the ultimate end goal?
There are lots of end goals. First thing is to be able to see the variation in the first place. That's the end goal of the Human Genome Project. Can you even see the variation in the first place? Once you can see it, then you could ask, well, can I predict disease traits? Sure. Can I predict other traits? Sure. Can I use it to help me link people to crimes? Maybe. Can I use it to infer someone's ancestry? Sure. Can I use it to then figure out the mechanisms of certain biological processes, disease or not, and then kind of learn how to modify them? There's any number of applications, really. But it all has to start with you can see the variation. Can you see the variation?
So here's a bit of a weird question on that,
go ahead,
too. So you see these variations from, and I'm not sure if you know this or not, but are there specific segments where we see a ton of variation versus those that are not, where it just may happen to be that that's just a part of our genome that tends to be more likely with different populations to see different types of expression? Is that something that goes on, or is it really kind of all over the place?
Oh, there's absolutely regions of the genome that have higher concentrations of genetic variation. So the two types of variation that happen in humans, basically. There's more than this, but the two fundamental processes are recombination and mutation, right? Recombination is you shuffle up different bits of chromosome between mommy and daddy, or really grandma and grandpa go into the sperm or the egg that make you. And then mutation, right? And they can be point mutations that switch out just one base in the code, or they can be more complicated. In any case, there are definitely hot spots along the genome where recombination happens. It doesn't happen randomly everywhere. Furthermore, mutation definitely happens not randomly along the genome. You can kind of you can estimate like an average rate, but it's definitely concentrated. And like, for example, the most famous site for this really is it's called the MHC. And if you think what that is your immune system, in order to recognize foreign things, foreign proteins, has to be able to grab it. It has to be able to grab it. It doesn't have cells don't have eyeballs. Your white blood cells aren't in there with eyeballs, finding, ooh, that looks foreign. Let me go grab that. It has to be just feeling around in the milieu surrounding your cells, hoping that it can like pick up stuff, within itself, outside of itself, blah, blah, blah. And it has little hands, claws that let it do this. They're called the MHC. And it's very important. Actually, every person, you can have up to 6 different. The average person has up to 6 different hands in their genome because it's coded redundantly. Because it really helps to have a lot of different hands to pick up different things. Because guess what? Not all things are the same, and not all hands can pick up everything. Right? And so that's one of the regions of the genome with the most diversity across humans. It looks like actually there's some people argue that diversity has been selected for there because you really don't want to have all the same hand. You want to have a lot of different hands popping in the population because there's a lot of different pathogens, a lot of different foreign things out there. So that's a region of extreme genetic heterogeneity.
Wow. So that's super cool. And I know you're not necessarily an expert or specialized in the Human Genome Project, but while we're on the subject, I have to ask, can you quickly touch about maybe what are some of the ethical concerns or implications about not only that project, but other similar projects?
Yeah, no, well, I think in general people, I used to worry about more of this too, with like prediction, once you start getting, there's a lot of directions that genomics are heading right now. There's the future with CRISPR and genome editing, and we're just going to start making factory babies. There are already services that try to offer something kind of like that. It gets really dodgy, but in general, the good thing about when you think about things like Gattaca or predicting people is that for at least a lot of traits that we care about, we're not very good at predicting. Fundamentally, we're not. And what I mean by that is there might be a lot of genes that contribute to one trait or another, but we're not that great at predicting. And a lot of things truly are largely explained by environmental stuff. like a large proportion of their variants, and that's great. Basically, in layman's terms, outside of like a couple of the handful of geniuses out there, which who knows, we still haven't figured out what makes them geniuses genetically. Say, most people are smart because we know how to make smart. Education is good or not good, and we've gotten a whole history of stuff. There's like only a lot of these hot button traits that I and many people used to be more worried about. At least now at this moment, I'm feeling a bit better about because I realize that actually
the designer babies.
Yeah.
The designer babies, we are not there yet, or hopefully never get there, is what you're saying.
Well, it depends what you want to design. Like, right? In terms of certain physical characteristics, you could design that probably now with what we know now. I mean, I'm primarily worried about...
I think that well, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I think that the natural concern is there going to be a day where if you can afford it, you're going to be 6 foot, you're going to have a child who's 6'5" and blonde hair and blue eyes, and you either play the game or you're going to be at a huge disadvantage, your child.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
I think that's the concern.
Yeah, that I mean, that's terrifying. And it is an option, right? It's in the sense that we know enough for those traits, height, hair color, eye color. Yeah, that can be done. That totally can be done. Those are well understood. I was mainly focusing on what divergences in like intelligence or whatever we call intelligence or different types of intellectual capacity. That is much more complex, thankfully, in a way. And so, I think I don't know if we'll get there. It's kind of interesting. Like obviously, like things go into fashion or don't go into fashion. So maybe I don't know what the future's going to hold. But I almost have a hope that humans will be like, well, I want my kids to kind of look like me, or come with some ancestry or remembrance of their lineage. So maybe we all don't want to be Aryan-looking babies. I don't know.
That's the hope.
That's the hope,
right? Let me ask you this question: Ancestry, DNA, 23andMe. I know a lot of people personally who are very hesitant to take their cheek swab and give it to a private business. What are your thoughts to those businesses? Do you think that's a really neat, harmless thing, or are there health implications?
It's interesting. I haven't done it myself, and I guess that's partly because I am, I'm a bit of a private person. I use Signal. I'm one of those guys, and so I realized I'm a little bit on the paranoid side of the human spectrum, but. I used to be worried about prediction. I don't think they can predict quite as easily anymore. I guess I just don't like the idea of giving away something that I kind of feel is innate to me. And also innate to all of my kids and all my relatives. And that's, I guess, part of the problem for me is I don't know what it means to give away part of my genome now. I know it's worth it. I know it's worth it to them, right? Because once they get a big data set of people together, they can do all kinds of things. Drug target finding, prediction for human traits. That's valuable. In aggregate, our value is worth something. And you don't really get that much of a kickback from that. Well, they could say, ooh, we're sequencing your genome below cost, and that's your kickback. Well, I say, well, I want a penny every time you make a prediction from my DNA, but right? And also it gets into questions of ethics, right? Like, if these sequencing companies could really aggregate data from across many diverse human populations, you almost wonder if it's like mining some sort of new gold, like extraction through these marginalized communities. Because it truly is. Like their DNA is really worth a lot if you're from a more isolated, like the Pacific Islanders, right? Like their DNA is worth a lot to humans because it's very different. It's not to humans, sorry, it's worth a lot to science. And so, I almost would wonder, like, what are the ethics around that resource aggregation or extraction? I don't know.
Well, and the other question I ask, Ryan, is like, so I did do Ancestry DNA, and I think it's fascinating, but I also think to myself, well, did I just more or less give up a lot of important data that not only impacts me, but also my immediate family, right? Like Ron, he may choose for ethical reasons, I don't want to participate in Ancestry DNA. Because they have my data, I assume they probably could figure out Ron's background simply because we're fully blooded brothers. Yep. Right? They don't even need him.
Yep. You guys share half of your DNA, roughly. Yep. And so that's part of the thing. It's like if I give that over, I don't know what the future is going to hold. But then they have like half my kids' DNA, and then they have a quarter of my grandkids' DNA, and eventually, actually, it's funny how people think about ancestry. You go enough generations down, eventually, not only does your contribution to someone's genome get near zero, it can actually go to zero. Everyone talks about the average. They don't talk about the variance. And so anyway, it's kind of funny. Like, oh, they're descended from me. Well, you may not actually share any DNA with that person that you call your 16th, But obviously the question is, what do you call ancestry? Is it the cultural heritage? Is it something else? Is it the DNA? It's all bound up, right? But yeah, so I don't know. I wouldn't be worried, Alex. I mean, maybe I'm being a bit paranoid. What's funny is
but you haven't done it. My question is, would you?
I think at this moment, not at this moment. I also feel a bit skeptical with these things, probably because you almost never know what you're going to find. There are too many stories out there. I don't think this is very true in my case. But the thing is, when you contribute to a data set like this, there's been so many cases of people like finding cousins or not finding cousins they would expect. Let's say I go on there. I know my cousin Kevin's done it, say. What if I go on there, I find out, oh, he's not my cousin genetically? Guess what that just told me? Somebody slept with somebody that, and so it's almost like you hear all these cases of people finding out relationships or unfinding relationships, and I'm like...
And that stuff is absolutely true. Right. That happens every day.
Yeah, and it might not even have to do with me, right? And so I'm just like, I think I'll lay off of that.
But isn't that supporting the idea that ignorance is bliss?
Sometimes it really is. Do you want to know the day and time of your death? I sure don't. I know. I hope I'm making coffee one morning, have a massive internal hemorrhage, and just fall right there. Bye, everybody. It was great.
So, getting back to that point, though, that you made about the data and even monetization about it, I'm not sure if you've heard about it, but there's a company that was looking to actually buy out Rite Aid, right? And one of the things that they wanted to do that I thought was a really interesting idea, they're more of a data science company, but they said that a company like Rite Aid has a tremendous amount of value just in the amount of customers that they have. And one of the things that they supported the idea of was to say, how about we give you a free DNA test, right? The results that you get are basically tokenized within the blockchain. So the idea would be that you could consent to any of your genetic information being used for testing with the idea that you would actually be incentivized for that. So if you were looking for something like that, and the idea would be that you would maintain control of it. So if anybody ever wanted to use it, you still maintain that, which is...
You're licensing your data as more
right.
or less, right?
You'd more or less just opt in to say, I don't know, let's say some drug company wanted to test what would be the result of testing against various people's genetic backgrounds. You could say, hey, I'll do that for $1. You can use my genetic information for that.
You're getting like a dividend.
Right. But the idea would be you would still own it, which was kind of an interesting thought process compared to what you have right now, where Ancestry and 23 and various other companies, you more or less, yes, they will give you information, but you're also, what they do with your information is not necessarily completely visible.
They own.
Right.
Yeah.
They own everything that I gave them.
Right.
I have no ownership of it.
The only other thing I'll add to that conversation is if you really want to give people control, they should be able to take back their data. Now, blockchain serves the one purpose of the licensing, right? You can choose to give your data. Once you've given it, they have it. And they can, I don't know, depending on the terms of the contract, redistribute it, resell it, repackage it, do what they will, right? And honestly, a lot of the knowledge that you gain from it is in that first look. But not always. And what's interesting, actually, is a lot of work that's actually quite maturing quite well now. And the people have been applying this to genomics quite thoroughly now, especially there's also a big European consortium around this. Anyway, around doing privacy-preserving algorithms when working with genetic data. In other words, this is really a kind of older math called Homomorphic Encryption. And we don't have to get into all the details, but what's really amazing about it is that it's an encryption scheme where if you take your data, you encrypt it, you encrypt some data, if you take, A and B, you encrypt A and B, and you if you want to calculate A plus B and get C, right? You can do that, unencrypt it. But if you take A encrypt it plus B encrypt it, get something, and then decrypt that, it's usually, it's never going to be C, right? And same thing happens in multiplication. You can't take A times B and think that if you encrypt it, it'll get, and then do the multiplication, get C, and then decrypt that, you'll get the product back. However, homomorphic encryption preserves addition and multiplication across the encryption barrier. And because most of all functions in math, if they're analytic, blah, blah, who cares, they can be written in terms of multiplication and addition. Basically, compute, people have already, one of my good colleagues actually, one of my good friends as well, has actually done this with random forests. He's done fully encrypted random forests for a machine learning algorithm where the algorithm never knew the data, never saw it. The data was encrypted, never got to see it, but actually was able to then learn and do predictions as if it had seen the raw data.
Wow.
Yeah. And there provably is no way for the algorithm to have seen the data. So that's what I mean is, what if, you use, and there's other encryption schemes. People use this type of encryption scheme. You could actually encrypt it in that way on the blockchain and license your data out, and they can use it for predictions, whatever they will, over a certain amount of time. But if you want to revoke it, you can, and then you get it back. And guess what? They never had it in the first place. And so, I think the power of these there's a lot of startups. This has been around now. This has been hot for maybe 5 years now. But a lot of companies that are trying to use these encryption schemes to give people ownership back over some of their data. It's really cool.
That is really cool.
Right? Sweet.
So I'm going to get hate mail if I don't ask this, because I alluded to it, and then we moved on. Briefly talk to us about what your thesis was.
Oh, yeah, no. Well, it's trying to find a different way of answering this question of, give me a lot of people's DNA. Tell me who, say, is tall or not. Now go find me the genes that control or govern height. That's a standard problem. It's called genome-wide association. They're called genome-wide association studies. There's a myriad of methods out there designed in this area. We have a different one. We think it's better and cooler. It's specifically interested in regions of the genome where, especially as you get more diverse data sets, right, for this, as we sequence more people from different ancestries, it might be that you might find a gene that governs some trait partly, weakly, but let's say it only has one mutation in humans, and it's not that strong. There's one mutation, let's say, in Europeans, and it's not that strong. But let's say in this other African subpopulation, there's another mutation in that gene that also has some effect, but it's also small. And then let's say in East Asians, there's another mutation, there's another effect that's also small. And in a South American group, same deal. If you can aggregate the information across these different mutations in the same gene, you might be able to take all these weak signals and boost them and combine them so that you can find the overall gene. That's the idea. It turns out to be a hard problem, mainly because you're looking for a few needles in a haystack of genetic relationships in that gene. Like the ancestry of that gene is extremely complicated. There's lots of structure, and somehow you need to try to be able to find which subbits of that structure might have an effect among the noise. And the thing is, there's so much noise, it's hard to get statistical power to find those signals. And so it's actually been a really fun project, and it's something I've actually continued working on even until now. It's been a problem I've worked on for nearly 5-10 years of my life. And it's actually really cool. And anyway, now it's evolved a lot, and we've come up with lots of methodology around it. And I'm most proud of, I think, well, there are a lot of things I'm proud of about it, but I'm really excited. For example, right now, even we found that one of the mechanisms, one of the procedures we use in our genomics algorithm actually be applied to any, we call it a sparse regression problem, but where you have something you're trying to predict, and you're trying to predict it from a lot of different x's. Predict y from a lot of different x's. And if only a few of those x's matter, it's hard. And we have a new kind of algorithm out there that's, got its weaknesses, got its pluses, but quite different from anything else out there that can try to answer that problem. To find the x's that matter, to try to ask, are there any x's that matter in the first place? And then maybe build a predictor off of it. So that's really fun. It's called Rennie distillation. So look out for it on the Math Archive. Anyway.
Whoa. Yeah, for those kids listening, calculus does have application after high school.
Yeah, yep. It keeps going. The rabbit hole keeps going.
Yeah. Oh, my gosh. Hey, so, Ryan, I know we're running out of time, but I do want to talk a little bit about you and your wife. You met your wife, Emily, while you were at Oxford. You were both studying at Oxford together. Totally different subject matters, but that's where you met. And I'm just so fascinated. I mean, you grew up, we went to high school together, Americana, apple pie. I mean, that's Middletown, Delaware,
Yep.
right? In a Waffle House, right? And now you moved to England. You're dating this girl, now your wife. What was that like? And are you now a tea guy?
Oh, I am still much a coffee guy. I think if anything, I've converted her. Now she's the coffee fiend. Absolutely. I don't know. It's wonderful. It's always funny, like, starting the date and then get to know someone from a different culture. Everyone, likes to think, oh, Americans, Brits, they speak the same language, kind of. They must be something. It's quite different.
And they love their OURs,
yes,
for sure.
They do. And they love their skips, and they love their
full stop.
Yep, their full stop and their teapot cozies and any number of little words or phrases they use. You're like, wait, come again? I think there are various cultural bridges to build, but that's part of the excitement, right? So I don't know, it was fun. It's been a joy.
Was there a dish? Was there a dish while you were in Oxford that you were craving that you're like, the Brits don't know how to do this?
Oh, yeah.
I can't wait
there are
to
a
get back
number
to
of
the
things.
States.
Number one, Mexican food. Oh, my God. You go to buy guacamole in a British supermarket. 25% of that guacamole will be mayonnaise. I'm not kidding. Ingredients list. Number one ingredient, mayo in your guac. Awful. That just says it all. But man, I really love Mexican food, or just Latin food in general.
Well, it's funny. Ron said the same thing when he came back from Singapore. First thing he wanted was Mexican.
That's right.
Well, and it was such a weird thing because I mean, yeah, when you're internationally living, right, you certainly see the full gamut of food. And one of the cool parts about American culture is that American food culture is everywhere. But there's certain parts of it that people assume are like, oh yeah, like I remember I would sometimes get sick from Singaporean food that just whatever reason made me sick. And I'd be like, okay, I need to go back to my Western diet. So people would be like, well, there's your KFC and there's your McDonald's, go at it. And I'm like, I know that's what you think we all eat, but there's other foods too. But I remember one of the things that I loved the most that it was tough to find was Mexican food. And even though there was a Taco Bell did not serve beef on the menu, which that was a bit of a, I sat there and I was like, well,
what's Taco Bell without beef?
Right, I was kind of crying when I ate it.
That's like Taco Bell without cheese.
Right, you're just sitting there like, well, what does it come with? And you're like, well, it's chicken. And I'm like, chicken tacos? I mean, you can do it, but, So I did eventually find one, but yeah, that's completely true. Alex is right. When I came back, one of the first foods I wanted was Mexican food. And I assume it was maybe similar for you as well?
Yeah, absolutely. There was one place of solace was the Big Society on Cali Road, which I don't know if the ownership's changed. At least when I was there, they served classic Tabasco-covered buffalo wings. And like there is something very sacred about a very classic, perfectly fried, hot, big and juicy Tabasco buffalo wing. You guys are Bills fans, all hail Buffalo. And yeah, that's one thing that I went there for my comfort food. And it's funny, I brought a lot of Brits along onto the Buffalo bandwagon through the Big Soap.
No, I love it.
So there it is.
Well, it was funny because I remember Ron, he spent his year in Singapore. I think you came back and visited once, but when you did your whole year, You came back. We picked you up in Newark Airport in New Jersey, and I remember there was a Mexican joint in Fox Run, in Bear, Delaware, and they had this dish, and it was ridiculous. Like everything on the menu was like $6, right? $6. There was one item on the menu that was like $24.99, and it was called the Conquistador, and it was like 7 plates of food. And Ron's like,
"You're amazing.
I want the Conquistador." And yeah, Ron, you ate as much of it as you possibly could, and you got your food.
Well, you forget there's one other thing, and I'm not sure if this is the same in England or not. But one of the nice things that I missed about the U.S. is you could get like the 72-ounce, bladder buster, like for drinks that you're like trying to you need 2 hands to sip out of. In the U.S., that's not something that we were able to get over there. They give you like these little 6-ounce glasses of water, and you're just like, okay, well, I need like another one. Whereas in the U.S., I'm like, oh yeah, you got this bottomless 72-ounce, and I'm making it up a little bit, but that was definitely something that I definitely enjoyed coming back to the U.S. Was enjoying also the ridiculous portions of our beverages.
God bless America.
Amen.
Totally agree. Let me ask you this, Ryan. Anyone listening on the podcast who might be saying to themselves, you know what, I'm about to move to the UK. What are some American wisdom, knowledge that you would give to an expat moving over to?
Oh, yeah. Well, a couple things, culturally speaking, when a British person says, could you maybe, perhaps, when you get a chance, do X? What they really mean is, no, go do X now. Okay? So they wrap everything, and you have to learn to do that the other direction. If you write just admin staffs run the world, right? If you write to someone, you need, like I said, paperwork, whatever from, like, hey, send me X, please, done. Very, very curt. They're not going to get a great response often. Americans are just much more direct, both directions, I think. Not as much as maybe like other cultures even, but in the UK you have to dress things a little more on both ends, and so just know how to interpret that. That's definitely there. I would say if you're looking for somewhere, if you're going to like expat, like straight up live, obviously London's amazing. London's the place to be. I would say places to visit, or perhaps I'd even consider living in, would be like Durham up in the north. Love Durham. It's got this incredible Game of Thrones style peninsula island where it's these steep cliffs with a castle and cathedral built around it. The river locally snakes around it, completely impenetrable fortress. Think like Game of Thrones, where the wolves are up in the north, is called Winterfell. Yes.
Winterfell.
Think Winterfell, but stone. Anyway, it's cool.
Cool.
So there's that. There's also Milton Keynes, which is where Emily actually grew up, which is, gets ragged on all the time because it doesn't have, XYZ, country village, whatever, blah, 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 cathedral, blah. But it's actually designed by hippies, and it's this really interesting place where all these communities have a mixed income housing by design, and they're all interlinked through this massive hundreds of miles long network of cycling/running paths that are completely divorced from the roads, and that go along canals and different places, connect the parks and the shopping center downtown. Basically, you can run from any point to any point in nature in this incredible, like, massive town city. It's like, hippies should have ruled the world. It's incredible. Check it out. The only thing is there's a lot of roundabouts, so if you get dizzy, it might not be your place. But it's also half an hour bullet train to the middle at Euston Station, King's Cross, London. So, if you want to work and live somewhere cool. Oh, and also for the hackers out there, it's literally 5 minutes from Bletchley Park, where Alan Turing et al. Did the code breaking.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's
it's very cool. So, check it out.
Yeah. Well, so I know we're right at time, but I'm going to ask one extra bonus question, because we didn't even talk about where you are today. You're at WashU, but you're also working at Yale as an associate research scientist. Give us the quick and dirty of what you're doing right now.
Yeah. So right now, I'm based at Yale in terms of my job, and I work now. Just continuing research on this kind of genomics project and these regressions, statistical methods that I mentioned. It's very fun. I still get to work with this amazing team of people. One's a computer scientist, one's a mathematician, one's a genomics expert. I had a grad student who's awesome. So it's just a great gig, and I'll plan to go back. Washi's been very generous with me because I keep taking these years to go do research instead of finishing my MD for various reasons. They're very generous with me to let me do that. But yeah, the plan is to come back and next year to knock out the rest of that clinical degree.
With all the breakthroughs, and this is the final question of the night, with all the breakthroughs that you're seeing in medicine, we just talked about the Genome Project, do you think the next 20 to 30 years we're going to see some significant milestones within curing cancer, for example, or something like Alzheimer's? I mean, these major pillars that have been with our society since human existence began, are we going to be knocking these out, or is that science fiction and we're talking much further down?
It's hard. I mean, every person tries to make a prediction on these things. I honestly am not super high up in the Alzheimer's literature at the moment to know kind of the state of play. I am more hopeful about cancer than Alzheimer's, actually, which is unusual because cancer is something that is kind of like you're fighting Murphy's Law, complex system. Eventually something's going to get mutated and break and grow. That's evolution, natural selection happening at the cellular level. That's what cancer is. And it's hard to try to fight that in general. But in the past, 5-10 years, there's been a huge breakthrough in new types of immunotherapies, very, very far from the chemotherapies of the old, that are still used and important. But there's been all this work to try to give your body special custom designed cells to attack the cancer, these CAR T cells, or try to take the brakes off your immune system to let them rev up really hard to go after these cells. There's all kinds of very special new avenues people come up with on the cancer front. I think much more hopeful. I don't think we're ever going to cure all cancers, right? I mean, you're fighting really not just one disease. You're talking a disease of the genome that is really fighting an army of mutants. And they're all different. Right, but I think we actually are going to I think we're going to make a lot of progress in helping people beat cancers, common cancers. In the next 10 years. Alzheimer's, it's tricky. They've been working on this with so many hypotheses and so much funding for so long, and they still haven't really figured out X causes Y causes Z causes Alzheimer's. And that's because it's very tricky. I'm not faulting the science at all, but it's until you start getting some more handles on this, it's hard to gauge how hard of a problem it is.
Yeah. Well, Ryan, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for being Between Two Studs. You've been a friend that I've known for, I guess, over 20 years now. And it is always a delight talking with you, and so glad you're on the podcast. And that concludes episode 49 of Between Two Studs with Dr. Ryan.
Thanks so much, guys. It's been a pleasure.